Tarass Boolba, Nicholas Gogol. 1. Well, son, turn round. Let me see thy back. What a queer figure thou art. What priest's cassocks have you got on? And do all of you at the college dress like that? These were the words with which old Boolba greeted his two sons, who, after completing their education at Kiev, had just returned to their father's house. His sons had just dismounted from their horses. They were two strong lads who still looked from beneath their brows as young collegians are apt to do. Their manly, healthy features were covered with the first down of hair, unacquainted as yet with the razor. Such a greeting on the part of the father put them to great confusion, and they stood motionless, with their eyes bent down on the ground. "Stay, stay a bit. Give me leisure to look at you," he went on, turning them round. "What long coats! What coats, indeed! Never in the world were such coats. Here, let one of you just try to run. We shall soon see if he does not fall and get his legs entangled in his skirts." "Don't laugh at us, father. Don't laugh," said at last the elder son. "Look at the haughty fellow, and why should I not laugh? For this reason, that though thou art my father, if thou goest on laughing, by heavens, I'll give thee a thrashing." "Ah, wretch of a son, thrash thy father," exclaimed Tarass Boolba, falling back a few steps in astonishment. "It matters not that thou art my father. I pay regard to nobody, and will permit nobody to insult me. And how are we to fight? With our fists? In whatever manner it may chance." "Well, with fists be it," said Tarass Boolba, tucking up his sleeves. "I will see what kind of a man thou art at fisticuffs." And father and son, instead of embracing after a long separation, began to give one another blows on the ribs, on the loins, and on the chest, now falling back and taking aim, and now stepping forward again. "Only see, good people, the old man has gone mad. He has decidedly lost his senses." Thus spoke the good mother, a thin, pale-faced woman who stood at the threshold and had not even had time to embrace her cherished sons. "The children are but just come home. For more than a year we have not seen them. And what has he got into his head that he should fight with them?" "He fights pretty well," said Boolba, stopping. "Very well, indeed," continued he, taking breath. "So that I'd better not have tried it. A good Cossack will he make. Well, son, good day. Let me embrace thee." And father and son began kissing one another. "Well, my son, as thou didst strike me, so strike everyone. Give quarter to none. And nevertheless, thy dress is very funny. What cord is that hanging about thy loins? And thou, sluggard," said he, turning to his younger son, "why dost thou remain there with thy hands hanging idle? Why, son of a dog that thou art, why dost thou not give me a beating?" "What hast thou hit upon now?" said the mother, embracing her younger son. "How couldst thou get into thy brain that a son should beat his father? And is this the proper time too? The child is yet young. He has undergone such a long journey, and is quite tired. The child was 20 years old and 7 feet high. He ought to take a meal and some rest, and thou wishest to make him fight." "Ah, I have it. Thou art a pet," said Boolba. "Do not, my son, give heed to what thy mother is saying. She is but a woman, and what can she know? As for thy coddling, the open field and a swift horse, these must be thy coddling. And look at this sabre. This is to be thy mother. It is all nonsense that they have been putting into your heads at the college. Books, grammars, and philosophy. Yes, the whole lot of them. I spit upon them all." Here Boolba used words such as are not to be met with in books. "I had better send you, not later than next week, to the Zaporoghian Ssiecha. There you will have something to learn. That will be a good school for you. There you will get brains." "And are they not to remain at home more than a week?" mournfully asked the old mother, with tears in her eyes. "Poor souls, they will have no time even to rest a little, no time to get acquainted with their father's roof, and I shall not have time to have a good look at them." "Have done, old woman. No howling. A Cossack is not made to spend his life with women. Hadst thou the power, thou wouldst put both of them under thy petticoat, and sit upon them as a hen does upon her eggs. Go, go, and have everything in the house put upon the table. We do not want pastry, honey cakes, poppy seed cakes, and all those sweet nonsenses. Bring us a whole roasted sheep, give us a buck, let us have some mead that is 20 years old, and above all things, plenty of brandy. And let it not be the brandy with raisins and various spices, but plain, clean, corn brandy that hisses and simmers. Boolba conducted his sons into the parlour, from which hastily rushed two pretty maidservants with red necklaces, who were putting the rooms in order. They might have been scared by the arrival of the young masters, who never let any woman pass by quietly. Or perhaps they did it only in accordance with the custom of all women, which is to shriek aloud and run away with the utmost speed at the sight of a man, and then afterwards stand and gaze at him, covering their faces with their sleeves, as if vastly ashamed. The great room was arranged according to the taste of those times, of which there are nowhere such vivid pictures to be found as in songs and popular legends. These, too, are no longer, as of yore, sung in Ukraine by blind, long-bearded old men, who used to sing them in the hearing of assembled crowds, and with the accompaniment of the soft music of the bandora. The furniture was also in the taste of those warlike, sturdy times, when the Union began to provoke struggles and battles in Ukraine. The walls were all neatly plastered with coloured clay. Upon them hung sabres, scourges, nets for catching birds and for fishing, guns, a powder horn of exquisite workmanship, a golden snaffle bit, and horse shackles with silver plates. The windows were small, with dim, round panes, such as are now found only in old churches, and through which one could only see by lifting the movable glass. The windows and doors were surrounded with stripes of red paint. In the corners there stood, upon shelves, an array of jugs, bottles, and flagons of green and blue glass, chased silver cups and gilded dram cups of Venetian, Turkish, and Circassian workmanship. They had come into Boolba's hands by various means, he being the third or fourth possessor of them, an occurrence very usual in those warlike days. Wooden benches ran all round the room. An immense table stood in the front corner under the holy images. A large stove, which had many projecting and receding corners, was covered with variegated varnished tiles. All this was familiar to our two youths, who had every year come home for the vacations. They had always until now come home on foot, because they had no horses, for collegians are not permitted to ride on horseback. The long tufts on the crown of their heads were the only mark of manhood allowed them, and even these every Cossack wearing arms had the right to pull. It was not till the conclusion of their studies that Boolba had sent them a pair of young horses, which he had selected for them out of his herd. Boolba, to celebrate the arrival of his sons, had sent invitations to all the centurions and all the officers of his regiment, and as soon as he saw two of them coming with his old comrade, the Esaul, Dmitro Tovkach, he introduced his sons to them, saying, "Look at them. Are they not pretty lads? I shall send them soon to the Ssiecha." The guests congratulated both Boolba and the two youths, saying that that was a capital thing, and that there was no better school for young men than the Zaporoghian Ssiecha. "Well, gentlemen brothers, sit down to table, every one where he pleases. Now, sons, before anything else, let's take some brandy." So spoke Boolba. "God's blessing be upon us. May God give you health, my sons, to thee, Ostap, and to thee, Andrew. May he ever grant you success in war, that you may get the better of all misbelievers, Tartars, and Turks, or Poles, if Poles attempt anything against our faith. Well, give me your cup. Is the brandy good? And what is the Latin for brandy? Well, son, the Romans were only so many fools. They did not even know so much as that there's brandy in the world. How do you call the fellow that wrote Latin verses? I am no great scholar, so I do not know his name. But let me see. Wasn't it Horace? Just see my father, thought the elder son, Ostap, to himself. He knows all about it, and yet feigns ignorance, the old dog. I think the abbot didn't so much as let you smell brandy, continued Tarass Boolba. Now, own, sons, they famously thrashed your back, and whatever else a Cossack possesses, with fresh birch rods. Or perhaps, as you grew cleverer, you were flogged with scourges. And I should think not only on Saturdays, but on Wednesdays and Thursdays too, you got your allowance. "What is the use of talking about what is past?" answered Ostap. "What is past can never come back." "Let anyone try it now," said Andrew. "Let anyone touch us now. If a Tartar were to come within our reach, now, we would soon let him know what sort of a thing a Cossack's sabre is." "Well said, son. Well said indeed. If things stand so, I will go with you. By heavens, I'll do it. What the devil have I to wait here for? Am I then to turn sower or farmer, or to pasture sheep or swine, and make love to my wife? Let them all perish. I am a Cossack, and will not be anything else but a Cossack. There is no war? Well, what then? I'll go with you just to have a look at the Zaporoghians. By heavens, I will." And old Boolba grew warmer and warmer in his speech, and at last, becoming quite fierce, rose from the table, drew himself up to his full height, and stamped with his foot. "Why should it be put off? Let us ride there tomorrow. Of what use would it be for us to wait? What is this house to us? Of what use is all this furniture? Of what use this crockery?" And with these words he began knocking about and dashing on the ground jugs and dishes. His poor old wife, seated on a bench, mournfully watched these proceedings of her husband, to which she was accustomed. She dared not interfere, but could not restrain her tears at hearing a decision so awful to her. She looked at her sons, from whom she was threatened to part so soon, and none could describe the extent of the silent intensity of sorrow which seemed to quiver in her eyes and in her convulsively compressed lips. Boolba was stubborn to an excess. His was one of those characters which could only take their rise in the gloomy 15th century, in a semi-nomad corner of Europe, at a time when the whole of primitive southern Russia was left by its sovereign princes a prey to the fire and sword of the unconquerable Mogul invaders. When the natives of that country grew daring after having lost hearth and roof, when they settled upon the sites of their former dwellings, within view of their terrible neighbors and of incessant danger, and learned to forget that there was any such thing in the world as fear. When, after having remained dormant for centuries, the Slavonic spirit was inflamed with the love of war, then it was that the Cossacks broke forth, that powerful sinew of Russian nature, and then the banks of all the rivers and the valleys and rich pasturages were covered with Cossacks. Nobody could number them, and rightly did their bold comrades give answer to the Sultan, who inquired their number. "Who can tell it? All the steppe over, for every mound there is a Cossack." In truth, it was an extraordinary outburst of Russian strength. Calamity struck it out of the breast of the Russian people, just as steel strikes fire out of flint. Ancient principalities had disappeared. Small towns with prickers and huntsmen were no more. Petty sovereigns exchanging their possessions had had their time. Instead of these, there arose formidable hamlets, villages, and communities bound together by common danger from, and common hatred to, the foes of the cross. History makes us acquainted how it was that their incessant struggles and restless life prevented Europe from falling a prey to the irresistible flood of Tartar invaders and from being overthrown by them. The Polish kings, who had superseded the Russian princes in the possession of their wide expanse of land, although far from these their possessions and without the means of enforcing their rule over them, understood the mission of the Cossacks and the advantages derivable from their warlike, lawless mode of life. They gave encouragement to their pursuits, nay, they even flattered them. It was under their remote sway that hetmans, chosen from among the Cossacks themselves, transformed hamlets and communities into regiments and regular military circuits. There was no regular standing army, not a soldier was to be seen, but in case of war or any general movement, everyone, before 8 days were over, appeared on horseback armed from head to foot, but receiving only a ducat from the king, and thus in a fortnight was gathered such a militia as no regular enlistments could ever have produced. The campaign once over, the warrior returned to his fields and pastures, or to the ferries over the Dnieper, betook himself to fishing, trading, and brewing beer, and he became once more a free Cossack. Well might foreign writers of this period express their astonishment at the manifold accomplishments of a Cossack. No trade, no business was unknown to him. He knew how to distill brandy out of corn, how to mend a carriage, how to grind powder. He was acquainted with blacksmiths as well as with locksmiths' work, and besides all this, he knew how to plunge into the vortex of the most riotous life, to drink and to carouse, as none but a Russian can. Besides the registered Cossacks, who were by duty bound to come forth in case of war, there were, at every period of great emergency, whole troops of mounted volunteers. The assails had nothing to do but to go through the squares and marketplaces of every city and village, and there, mounting on some carriage, cry aloud, "Ho, you brewers and coopers! Enough of brewing your beer, lolling on your ovens, and feeding flies with the fat of your bodies. Come and seek the glory and honour of knights. And you, ploughmen, sowers, shepherds, loiterers, have done with going behind the plough and daubing your yellow boots with mud, with running after girls and destroying your knightly strength. The time is come to win a Cossack's glory." And these words fell like so many sparks upon dry wood. Ploughmen broke their ploughs, brewers and coopers destroyed their tubs and casks, mechanics and tradesmen sent handicraft and trade to the devil, broke the furniture in their houses, and everyone, be he who he might, set off on horseback. In a word, here it was that the Russian character showed itself in its boldest and most striking outlines and received its most powerful development. Tarass Boolba was one of the old colonels, and a colonel of the old school too. In him seemed combined everything which makes a warrior, and his character was stamped by a stern uprightness. In those times, the influence of Poland already began to be felt amongst the nobility of South Russia. Many of the nobles began to adopt Polish fashions, to indulge in luxury, to keep a magnificent revenue, hawks and huntsmen, to give banquets and entertainments. All this was displeasing to Tarass. He liked the simple manner of life of the Cossacks, and quarrelled with those of his comrades who inclined towards the Warsaw party, nicknaming them the servants of Polish lords. Ever unconquerable, he took it for granted that he was the rightful defender of orthodoxy. He went, of his own accord, into every village where the tenants complained of oppression or of additional taxes laid on the cottages, and constituting himself judge of these grievances, he made it a rule that the sword was to be used on 3 occasions, viz., when the Polish commissaries did not pay due respect to the elders and stood covered before them, when they insulted orthodoxy and did not observe the faith of their forefathers, and lastly, when the foes were misbelievers or Turks, against whom, according to his notions, a Christian was in every case allowed to raise his sword. Now Tarass pictured to himself beforehand the pleasure he should have in bringing his sons to the Ssiecha, and in saying, "Look at them. Are not these fine fellows that I have brought you?" How he would introduce them to all his old comrades, hardened in so many combats. How he would behold their first deeds in war and in carousing, which was also accounted one of the great accomplishments of a knight. At first he had thought of sending them by themselves, but on seeing the freshness of their manly beauty, the height and strength of their frames, his warlike spirit kindled, and he resolved to go with them himself, although nothing but the stubbornness of his own will made it requisite. He was already busy giving orders, making choice of horses and trappings for his young sons, going into the stables and barns, and indicating the servants who were to start on the morrow with him. He deputed his authority to the Esaul Tovkach, giving him strict orders to come with his regiment at his first summons, were he to send from the Ssiecha for it. He forgot nothing, though he was rather tipsy, and his head was not yet quite clear. He even gave orders to water the horses, and to put the best and largest grained wheat into their mangers. At last he returned, tired out with his work. "Well, children, let us go to sleep, and tomorrow we shall do what God wills. No beds. We don't want beds. We will sleep in the yard." Night had scarcely crept over the sky, but Boolba always went to rest early. He lay down upon a carpet and rolled himself up in a sheepskin cloak because the night was rather fresh, and because he always liked when at home to be warmly covered. He was soon snoring, and everyone in the yard followed his example. All who were lying about in different corners of the yard set off snoring. First of all, the watchman fell asleep, for he had got more tipsy than anyone on the occasion of the young master's arrival. The poor mother alone could not sleep. She reclined on the pillow of her dear sons, who were lying side by side. She smoothed their young, negligently intermingled curls, moistening them with tears. She was gazing at them, ay, gazing at them with all her soul. Her whole being seemed absorbed in sight, and she could not cease gazing. With her own milk she had fed them, she had watched them grow, she had tended them, and now she sees them near her only for a moment. Sons, my own dear sons, what will happen to you? What is in store for you? And tears ran down on the wrinkles which disfigured her once handsome face. And indeed she was to be pitied, as were Neil the women of those warlike times. For one moment only had she enjoyed love, which wits during the first impulse merely of youth and passion, and then her stern lover had quitted her for his sabre, for his comrades, and for carousing. During the whole course of the year she saw her husband but for 2 or 3 days, and then years passed away without hearing anything about him. And even when she happened to see him and live with him, what a life was hers! She received nothing from him but insults, and often even blows. The caresses bestowed upon her were nothing but charity. She saw it. Strange was her existence among that mob of heartless warriors whose features bore the bronzed colouring peculiar to the Zaporoghians. She had seen her youth glide away without enjoyment, and her beautiful fresh cheeks fade without kisses and shrivel into wrinkles before due time. All her love, all her feelings, all that is tender and passionate in a woman, all was concentrated for her in one feeling, that of a mother. And like a bird of the steppe, she feverishly, passionately, and tearfully hovered over her children. Her sons, her dear sons, are to be taken away from her, to be taken where she may never see them again. Who knows? Maybe in the first battle a Tartar will cut off their heads, and she will not even know where to find their corpses. Perhaps those corpses, for each morsel of which, for each drop of whose blood she would give everything in the world, those very corpses may be thrown aside, and the wild birds of prey may tear them to pieces. Sobbing, she looked in their eyes, which sleep already began to close, and she thought, who knows but that Boolba, on awaking, may put off the departure for some 2 or 3 days. Maybe he resolved to start so soon, merely from having drunk too much. The moon had long ago risen in the heavens, and from their height shone down on the yard, covered with sleeping Cossacks, on the thick sallows, and on the high grass which had overgrown the palisade surrounding the yard. Still the mother remained sitting beside her dear sons, never taking her eyes off them for a moment, and never caring for sleep. The horses, feeling the approach of the dawn, lay down and ceased to feed. The upper leaves of the sallows began to move, and by degrees the murmuring current descended to the branches beneath. The mother remained sitting till dawn. She felt no weariness, and inwardly wished that the night might last still longer. Already the sonorous neighing of the foals was heard from the steppe. Red streaks brightly illumined the sky. All at once Boolba awoke and sprang to his feet. He was perfectly aware of the orders he had given on the preceding day. Up, lads, away with sleep. It is time, it is time. Give the horses their drink. Where is the old woman? So he usually called his wife. Quick, old woman, prepare our meal. We have a long journey before us. The poor old woman, deprived of her last hopes, went mournfully to the house. While tearfully she was preparing everything for breakfast, Boolba issued his orders. He bustled about in the stable, and himself chose the best equipment for his sons. The collegians were suddenly metamorphosed. Instead of their dirty boots and shabby dresses, they appeared in red boots with silver heels. Their trousers, of a tremendous width, with thousands of folds, were tightly girded with a gilded belt. Long leather thongs, with tassels and different requisites for the pipe, hung from their belts. Their Cossakins, of a fiery red cloth, were girded by brilliantly coloured sashes, in which were stuck pistols of Turkish embossed workmanship, and sabres were dangling about their heels. Their faces, not yet sunburnt, seemed to have grown still more handsome and still fairer. Their young, dark mustachios gave still more brilliancy to the healthy, robust bloom of their youth. Their black sheepskin caps, with the crowns of cloth of gold, became them excellently. Poor mother! When she saw them, she could not utter a word, and tears rushed into her eyes. "Now, sons, all is ready. Don't waste time," said Boolba at last. "Now, we must all, like Christians, sit down before the journey." Everyone sat down, including even the servants, who had respectfully stood at the door. "Now, mother, bless thy children," said Boolba. "Pray God that they may be brave in war, that they may ever preserve their knightly honor, that they may ever hold fast the faith of Christ. Otherwise, 'twere better they should die, better nothing remained of them in the world. Go to your mother, children. The prayer of a mother preserves one by sea and land." The tender mother embraced them, took 2 small holy images, and sobbing, hung them round their necks. "May the Holy Virgin preserve you. Don't forget your mother, my sons. Send me word about you." She could say no more. "Let us be gone now, children," said Boolba. Saddled horses stood near the door of the house. Boolba sprang on his own, named Devil, who furiously bounded aside as he felt on his back the weight of his rider, who was very stout and heavy. When the mother saw that her sons had also mounted, she rushed to the younger, whose features wore a somewhat more tender expression. She caught his stirrup, clung to his saddle, and, a picture of utter despair, would not let him loose. 2 strong Cossacks gently dragged her away and carried her into the room. But when she saw them cross the gateway, in spite of her age, she flew through the yard with the swiftness of a wild goat and, with incredible strength, stopped the horse and embraced one of her sons, with a mad, rapturous feverishness. Once more was she brought home. Mournfully rode the young Cossacks, restraining their tears lest their father should be angry, but he too was agitated, although he endeavored not to show it. The day was grey, the verdure was of a bright green. The birds seemed to sing discordantly. After having ridden for some time, they turned to look back. The farm seemed to have sunk into the earth. They could only see the 2 chimneys of their modest mansion and the tops of the surrounding trees. Those trees whose branches they used to climb like squirrels, but before them lay expanded the wide plain, that same plain which might bring back to their minds the whole history of their lives, from the years when they rolled in its dew-covered grass, down to the years when they were reclining in it, awaiting some dark-browed girl who timidly ran across it with her pretty little feet. Already, nothing is to be seen but the pulley over the well, with the wheel tied to its top. Already the plain, across which they rode but just now, has covered all behind and looks like a hill. Farewell, childhood. Farewell, youthful sports. All of you. Farewell. 2. The 3 riders all proceeded in silence. Old Boolba thought of former times. He saw pass before him his youth, his bygone years, those years which are always regretted by a Cossack, who would wish that his whole life were youth only. He thought of the comrades he should meet with at the Ssiecha. He remembered who those were who had died, and those who yet remained alive. A tear might have been seen trembling in his eye, and mournfully did he droop his grey head. Other thoughts occupied his sons, but more should be said about the sons. At 12 years old, they were sent to the college of Kiev, because all the important nobles of that time found it necessary to give an education to their sons, although it was apparently done merely for the purpose of their entirely forgetting it afterwards. Like all the collegians, they had something wild about them, having been brought up in perfect freedom. At the college, however, they got something of that external polish, which, being common to all collegians, made them so resemble one another. Ostap, the elder of the 2, began his career by running away the very first year. He was brought back, mercilessly flogged, and once more set to his book. 4 times did he bury his grammar in the ground, and 4 times, after having him horsewhipped without pity, a new one was bought for him. Yet he would no doubt have repeated the same attempt a 5th time, had not his father pledged him his word that he would have him shut up in a cloister for 20 years, and sworn that he should never see the Zaporoghian Ssiecha till he had been through the whole course of academic learning. It is worth notice that this was said by that same Tarass Boolba, who, as we have seen, laughed at all learning, and advised his children never to trouble themselves about it. From that time, Ostap grew intensely assiduous and was soon ranked among the best pupils. The education and the practical life of those times afforded the most striking contrast. All the scholastic, grammatical, and rhetorical subtleties were decidedly inappropriate to the epoch, inapplicable to anything, and of no use in afterlife. Even had the studies been much less scholastic, those who studied would have found nothing to which they could have been adapted. The first-rate scholars of that time were the most ignorant people in practice, because they, more than others, were removed from the experience of life. The republican form of the academical administration, as well as the great concourse of full-grown, healthy young men, could not fail to give the pupils' minds a direction quite alien to their studies. At one time, bad food, at others, oft-repeated punishments by hunger, then those impulses which arise in fresh, healthy, strong youths. All this combined to give them that enterprising spirit which afterwards attained its full expansion in the Zaporoghian Ssiecha. Hungry collegians rambled about the streets of Kiev and rendered everyone cautious. The market women who sat in the market, as soon as they saw a collegian coming, quickly covered with their hands their pies, rolls, and pumpkin seeds, just as eagles cover their young with their wings. The consuls, whose duty it was to watch over such of their comrades as were placed under their orders, themselves wore trouser pockets of such frightful dimensions that they could hide in them the whole contents of a tray if the market woman happened to look aside. These collegians formed a world apart. They were not allowed to mix in the higher circles, which consisted of Polish and Russian nobles. Even the voivoda, Adam Kissel, notwithstanding the protection which he showed to the college, did not allow the collegians admittance into society and ordered them to be treated with the greatest severity. This last injunction was, however, quite superfluous, for neither the rector nor the professors spared the rods and whips, and often at their commands the lictors gave their consuls such a sound flogging that the latter rubbed their trousers many weeks after. Many of them became indifferent to it and thought it only a little stronger than good brandy and pepper. Some found such frictions too frequent and too unpleasant, and at last took flight to the Ssiecha, if they could but find the way to it, and if they happened not to be caught during the journey. Ostap Boolba, notwithstanding his assiduity in learning logic and even theology, could by no means escape the inexorable rod. Of course, all this hardened his character and gave him that firmness which is so peculiar to the Cossacks. Ostap was always reputed the best of comrades. He was not often a leader of the others in daring enterprises, such as to lay waste some orchard or kitchen garden, but he was always among the first who joined the colours of the daring collegian who was to lead, and never on any occasion did he betray his comrades. No whip, no rods could make him do so. Nothing but fighting and carousing had any attraction for him. Never, at least, did he think of anything else. With his equals he was always open-hearted. He was good, so far as goodness was possible with such a character and at such an epoch. The tears of his poor mother had strongly impressed his mind, and might account for his depressed spirits and the thoughtful drooping of his head. The feelings of his younger brother, Andrew, were quicker, and in some degree more sharpened. He showed more inclination and less difficulty for study than is usually the case with a heavy, robust character. He had more contrivance than his brother, and more frequently became the leader in expeditions of danger, and oftener, thanks to his ready wit, found means to escape punishment, while his brother Ostap, setting aside every subterfuge, took off his coat and laid himself down on the floor without ever thinking of begging forgiveness. Andrew was as eager as his brother for warlike feats, but his heart was also open to other feelings. When he was scarcely 18, he felt to the quick the want of love. Thoughts of women would often visit his overheated fancy. Whilst listening to philosophical disputes, he saw every moment a fresh, dark-eyed, tender face. Continually there glimmered before him her round, smooth bosom, her delicate, beautifully moulded, bare arm. Even her dress, clinging to her maidenly yet powerful form, his fancy would depict as something indescribably voluptuous. These inspirations of his passionate youthful soul Andrew carefully hid from his comrades, for in those times it was reputed a shame and a dishonor to a Cossack to think about women and love before having gone through a battle. And yet, during the later years, he was no longer so often the leader of collegian parties, but was more frequently to be seen strolling about one of the lonely lanes of Kiev, overshadowed by cherry-tree gardens which surrounded some low cottages. He also went sometimes into the aristocratic street in that part of Kiev, which is nowadays called the Old Town, where the nobility of Little Russia and Poland used to live, and where the buildings in their appearance showed more refinement. Once, as he was gazing about the street, he was nearly caught by the wheels of the carriage of some Polish lord, and received a well-aimed cut of the whip from the frightfully mustachioed figure who sat on the box of the carriage. The young collegian took fire at once. With inconsiderate audacity, he grasped with his powerful hand the rear wheel and stopped the carriage. But the coachman, fearing the result, whipped the horses. They started forward, and Andrew, who fortunately had time to withdraw his arm, fell flat on the ground with his face in the mud. The most sonorous and harmonious laughter resounded above him. He lifted up his eyes and saw, standing at a window, a beauty, the like of whom he had never seen before. Her eyes were dark, and the whiteness of her complexion was like the snow, lighted by the rosy-colored rays of the morning sun. She laughed with all her heart, and laughter gave additional splendor to her beauty. He remained riveted to the spot. Unconscious of everything around him, he looked at her and, absent in mind, wiped the mud from his face, soiling it still more. Who could that lovely girl be? He tried to learn her name of the servants, who, in rich dresses, were assembled in a crowd at the gate, round a young musician playing on the bandora. But the servants burst out laughing on seeing his dirty face, and no one condescended to answer him. He succeeded at last in ascertaining that the young lady was the daughter of the voivoda of Kovno, who had come to Kiev for a certain time. Next night, with an audacity peculiar to collegians, he crept through a palisade into the garden, climbed a tree whose branches were widely spread, and leaned on the very roof of the house. From the tree he got onto the roof, and gliding down a chimney, came straight into the room of the beauty, who was just then sitting before a light and taking her costly earrings out of her ears. The beautiful girl was so terrified at seeing before her a strange man that she could not utter a word. But when she saw that the collegian remained standing, his eyes bent on the ground, and not daring, from bashfulness, to move even his hand. When she recognized him to be the same person who had fallen in the street beneath her eyes, she once more gave vent to her laughter. Besides, Andrew's features had nothing alarming in them. He was very handsome. She laughed with all her heart, and continued a long time amusing herself at his expense. The beauty was as flighty as only a Polish woman can be, but her eyes, her beautiful, her piercingly bright eyes, threw glances as lasting as constancy. The collegian remained motionless, and seemed as if all his limbs were tied up in a sack, when the voivoda's daughter came boldly up to him, put her brilliant diadem upon his head, hung her earrings on his lips, and threw on his shoulders a transparent muslin chemisette with gold-embroidered festoons. She dressed him out in different ways, and played with him 1,000 silly tricks with the childish ease so characteristic of the giddy Poles, and which added still more to the confusion of the poor collegian. His mouth wide open, his looks riveted on her brilliant eyes, he made the most laughable figure. A noise which was heard at the door aroused her fears. She ordered him to hide himself under the bed, and as soon as the noise was over, she called for her maid, a Tartar prisoner, and ordered her to conduct him cautiously into the garden, and thence to see him over the palisade. But this time our collegian was not so fortunate in getting over the palisade. The watchman, awaking, gave him a vigorous blow over the legs, and the servants, assembled by the noise, beat him in the street, long before his swift feet carried him out of their reach. After this, it was very dangerous to pass near the house of the voivoda, the more so as his servants were numerous. Andrew saw his beauty once more in a Latin church. She noticed him, and gave him a pleasant smile as to an old acquaintance. Once more, but only en passant, did he see her, and then the voivoda left Kiev, and after that, instead of the beautiful dark-eyed Polish girl, A broad, coarse face looked out of her windows. This is what Andrew was thinking about, with his head bent down and his eyes fixed on the mane of his horse. Meanwhile, the steppe had long ago received them in its green embrace, and its high grass, encircling them, had hidden them so that only their black Cossacks' caps were now and then to be seen above it. "Hey, hey, hey! What are you about, lads? Why so silent?" said Boolba, recovering from his meditation. "Just like monks. Come now, all at the same time. All sad thoughts to the devil. Take your pipes between your teeth, light them, set spurs to your horses, and let us take such a gallop that no bird shall get the better of us." And the Cossacks, slightly bending towards the manes of their horses, disappeared in the high grass. Not even their black caps were now to be seen. Their course could only be followed by looking at the furrow in the grass, which they crushed with the rapidity of lightning. The sun had long since appeared in the sky and poured its vivifying warm rays over the steppe. All that was perplexed or dreamy about the souls of the Cossacks fled at once, and their hearts bounded within them like birds. The farther the steppe went, the grander it became. At that time, the whole tract of land which now forms New Russia, even as far as the coast of the Black Sea, was but one green, uninhabited waste. No plough ever furrowed its immense wavy plains of wild plants. The wild horses, which herded there, alone trampled them down. Nothing in nature could afford a more beautiful scene. The whole extent of the steppe was nothing but a green-gold ocean, whose surface seemed besprinkled with millions of different-coloured flowers. Here, through the thin, tall blades of the grass, were to be seen purple, blue, and violet cornflowers. There, the pyramidal top of a yellow genistella shot up suddenly. The umbrella-shaped heads of the clover shone like so many white spots. Some ears of wheat, brought heaven knows whence, were slowly ripening amongst the grass. Under their thin stems, partridges were fluttering with outstretched necks. The air was filled with the calls of thousands of different birds. Goshawks remained stationary in the sky, with wings widespread and eyes fixed on the grass. The screams of a flock of wild geese, which like a cloud was seen moving on one side of the horizon, were re-echoed by the murmurs from some distant lake. A gull might be seen, with measured flapping of its wing, rising in the clouds and luxuriously bathing in the blue waves of the air. Behold, now it disappears in the skies, and only at times shows like a dark spot on them. There again, it turns round, and its wings gleam in the sunshine. "The deuce take ye, O steppes! How beautiful you are!" Our travellers stopped only a few minutes for dinner. On this occasion, the 10 Cossacks who formed their escort alighted and brought forward the barrels of corn brandy and the hollow pumpkins, which supplied the place of plates. The dinner consisted of nothing but bread, lard, and wheaten biscuits. 1 cup of brandy, and no more, was allowed to everyone, just to keep up his strength, for Tarass Boolba never permitted anyone to get tipsy whilst travelling. Then the journey was resumed. As evening came on, the whole scenery of the steppe underwent a change. The last bright reflection of the sun encircled once more its variegated expanse, which gradually grew darker, so that the shades of evening might be seen coming step by step over it, making its green hue more and more black. The exhalations arose more densely. Every flower, every herb sent forth sweet perfumes, and a cloud of fragrant smells seemed to hang over the whole of the steppe. Over the blue-tinted sombre skies, a gigantic brush seemed to have drawn broad stripes of red gold. At times were to be seen gliding like so many white flocks, light, transparent clouds. The most refreshing breeze, pleasant as the sea waves, gently ruffled the surface of the grass and softly touched the cheek. The harmony which had filled the steppe during the day died away and gave place to other sounds. Animals, which had remained in their holes underground during the day, came out and made the steppe resound with their cries and hisses. The chirp of the crickets grew louder and louder. Sometimes from a distant pond was heard the cry of a swan, which rang silvery through the air. The travellers, after choosing their halting place, stopped under the canopy of heaven, made a fire, and warmed the kettle in which they boiled their gruel. The curling smoke floated up above in a curved line. After supper, the Cossacks lay down for sleep after having tied the legs of their horses, which were left to feed in the grass. The Cossacks stretched themselves on their cloaks. They could see right above them the stars of the night. They could hear the numberless myriads of insects which filled the grass, whose chirping, whose whistling, whose shrill notes resounded sharply through the stillness of that hour and the freshness of the night air, and formed together a delightful harmony. If anyone happened to lift his head or to arise, he saw all the steppe covered with the sparkling light of the glowworms. Sometimes, at different places, the sky seemed glaring with fire, which had been set to the dry reeds in some distant fields, or along the banks of some river, and then a dark line of swans, flying towards the north, suddenly lighted up a pink-silvered streak, and it seemed as if rosy scarfs were fluttering in the sombre skies. Our travellers journeyed on without any adventure. No trees met their view. On every side expanded the same endless, free, beautiful steppe. At times only might be seen the remote blue tops of the forests growing along the banks of the Dnieper. Once only, Tarass pointed out to his sons a small black spot at a great distance in the grass and exclaimed, "Look, children, there is a Tartar." A small mustachioed face peered at them with its narrow eyes, sniffed the air like a harrier, and disappeared at once, seeing there were 13 Cossacks. "Well, lads, will you try to catch the Tartar? You had better not. You will never overtake him. His steed is swifter than my devil." Yet, fearing some hidden mischief, he took his precautions. Coming to a narrow stream, which fell into a river, he ordered his followers to enter the water on horseback, and they did not continue their journey till they had swum a long way to hide their track. 3 days later, they were near the end of their journey. The air grew colder. They felt the proximity of the Dnieper. Behold, there it sparkles in the sun and forms a wide, dark streak beneath the sky. Its cold waves come nearer and nearer, and on a sudden surround half the horizon. It was at this part of the Dnieper that, after being compressed in its course by the rapids, it reconquered its liberty, and spreading out freely, roared like the ocean. The islands thrown in its center made it rush still more vehemently towards the banks, and its waves rolled on the even ground without having to dash over any rocks or elevations. The Cossacks dismounted, got into a ferry boat, and after a passage of 3 hours, they reached the island Khortytsa, where, for the time being, was the camp of the Ssiecha, which so often changed its seat. A crowd of people stood on the bank of the river quarrelling with the ferryman. The Cossacks adjusted their horses for mounting. Tarass assumed a dignified air, tightened his belt, and proudly twirled his mustachios. His young sons, too, looked at themselves from head to foot, with some unaccountable terror and no less unaccountable pleasure. Then they all rode together into the suburb, which was about half a verst from the Ssiecha. On entering it, they were deafened by the sound of 50 blacksmiths' hammers, which fell with heavy strokes in 25 forges, dug in the ground and covered with grass. Strong tanners sat in the street at their own doors and scutched ox hides with their powerful hands. Tradespeople sat under tents loaded with flints, steels, and gunpowder. Here, an Armenian has hung up costly handkerchiefs for sale. There, a Tartar is roasting pieces of mutton rolled in dough. There, a Jew, his head stretched forward, is drawing off corn brandy from a cask. But the first man they saw was a Zaporoghian lying asleep in the very middle of the road, his arms and legs stretched far apart. Tarass Boolba could not help stopping to admire him. "Now, is not this a glorious sight?" "Ah, what a fine sight," said he, stopping his horse, and the sight was certainly a striking one. There lay the Zaporoghian, like a lion, full length on the road. His crown tuft, proudly thrown back, was fully a foot in length. His trousers were smeared with tar in order to show his utter contempt for the costly scarlet cloth of which they were made. After remaining for a while looking at him, Boolba continued to thread his way through a narrow street, crowded by workmen who, in the street itself, were working at their trade, and by people of every nation, who filled this suburb of the Ssiecha, which wore the appearance of a fair, and whence the Ssiecha derived its food and clothes, for the Ssiecha itself knew nothing beyond carousing and fighting. At last they left the suburb and saw some Kurens scattered about and covered with grass, or according to the Tartar fashion, with cow-hair felt. About some of the Kurens stood cannons. Nowhere could be seen any palisade or any of the low cottages with sheds on short wooden columns like those of the suburb. A small mound with a ditch guarded by no living soul was only a proof of the greatest carelessness. Some strongly built Zaporoghians, who were lying on the very road with their pipes between their teeth, coolly surveyed the riders, but did not even move. Tarass rode cautiously through the midst of them with his sons, and said, "Health be with you, gentlemen." "And with you too," answered the Zaporoghians. In every direction the field was covered with motley groups of people. Their brown faces bespoke them at once to be hardened in war and inured to every privation. So here is the Ssiecha, here is that nest, whence take their flight all those men as proud and strong as lions. Hence pour freedom and Cossackdom over all Ukraine. The riders came to an extensive square where the Rada was accustomed to assemble. The first person they saw was a Zaporoghian seated on a tub, who, having taken off his shirt, was holding it in his hand, slowly mending the holes in it. Then they were stopped in their progress by a troop of musicians, in the midst of whom was dancing a young Zaporoghian, his cap carelessly thrown on one ear, and his hands wildly tossed in the air. He cried incessantly, "Quicker, quicker, musicians! And thou, Thomas, don't spare brandy for the Christians." And Thomas, with a black eye, was busily engaged in pouring out brandy for every newcomer. Near the young Zaporoghian, 4 old ones were also dancing, sometimes with quick, tiny steps, then again with the rapidity of the wind, throwing themselves on one side, almost on the heads of the musicians, then on a sudden bending their knees till they were almost in a sitting posture, and rushing thus from side to side, making the hard beaten earth ring with the heavy sonorous strokes of their silver-rimmed heels. The ground gave back a rumbling sound through all the vicinity, and the air at a great distance re-echoed the noisy trampling of their boots. But there was one among the dancers who shouted still louder and rushed about still more impetuously than the others. His long crown-lock floated in the wind, his sinewy breast was naked, he had on his warm sheepskin coat, and the perspiration poured down his brow as from out of a jug. "Well, now, take thy coat off," said Tarass at last. "Dost thou not feel the heat?" "No, I cannot," answered the Zaporoghian. "And why not?" "I cannot. Such is my habit, that what is once off I give up for brandy." And long since, indeed, had the lad had no cap, no belt to his coat, no embroidered handkerchief. They had all gone the way one might expect. The farther the crowd extended, the denser it grew. New dancers came every moment, and strange were the feelings excited at watching the freest and most furious dance the world ever beheld, and which, from the name of its mighty inventors, is called the Cossack. "Ah, were it not for my horse," cried Tarass, "I would, by heavens I would, go into the dance too." And meanwhile, amongst other people, they met some of the elderly Cossacks, with old grey crown-locks, who were held in great respect by all the Ssiecha, and had been many times chosen elders. Tarass was not long without meeting many well-known faces. Ostap and Andriy heard nothing but greetings such as these. "Ah, here thou art, Petcheritza. Good day, Kozaloop. In heaven's name, whence comest thou, Tarass? Why art thou here, Doloto? Good day, Kirdiaga. Good day, Gostoy. Who would have thought to see thee, Remen?" And warriors, assembled from the whole of the loose world of Western Russia, embraced one another. Next came the questions. And what of Cassian? Where is Borodavka? Where Kolopa? Where Pidsishok? But Tarass Boolba only got for answer that Borodavka had been hanged by the Poles, that Kolopa had been flayed alive by the Tartars, that Pidsishok's head had been salted and sent in a tub to Constantinople. Old Tarass bent his head and thoughtfully muttered, "Good Cossacks were they."